I'm Jann Freed. You can call me Dr. Jann, but I'm planning a Leadership Legacy Summit in June, and this is part of it. I'm honored to right now be interviewing Wally Bock. Wally is an author, book writing coach, blogger, and recovering adult. Early in his life, he was fired from a multinational company, a church institution, a carpet workroom, and a small trucking company. Eventually, he got the message. He was the only boss who would have him. Today, he spends his time helping successful people write excellent books. He lives in Hartsville, South Carolina, with a beautiful princess, one dog, Toto the terrorist, and a cat named Rooster, who came with the house, who has trouble staying serious for long stretches. Wally, I love that bio.
I had trouble staying serious when I wrote it, so there you have it.
Welcome, Wally. We're thrilled you're here, and thank you for being part of my summit. Before I forget, I want to mention that for those people listening, watching, participating on the webinar, if you have questions, we'd love to have you write them in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end of the interview for you to answer the questions. So please, as questions emerge, just please enter them into the chat. That'd be great. Well, let me just start off by saying, I read Wally's blog. I always learn something. Plus, Wally blogs about, he blogs about writing, and I love to read about how to become a better writer. So I encourage you to check out his blog because it's just rich with materials. He even reviews books, and he even highlights blogs that he likes, independent blogs that he likes, I think on a weekly basis, right, Wally?
Right, yep.
And so it's just rich with resources, and I definitely might need Wally's help in the future here. So let's talk about this, Wally. Okay, talk about the value of blogging, and has it decreased given all the other forms of social media? I've heard, I was telling someone, why have a blog? And they said, well, blogs are outdated. People are now with YouTube and Instagram, people are not paying attention to blogs. What do you think about that, Wally?
Well, it's not true. Well, I mean, what is true is that the number of bloggers has decreased because several people moved out of it. Some people have moved into other media, but the value is still there. There are several thousand people that read my blog,
yes,
and they're getting value from it. I think what's happening is we're developing a range of media that we can use, and blogging is still a good one, but it's not as popular as it was, say, 10 years ago.
Okay. But it's still, what I like about it is I always say to people, whether, I certainly don't have the following that you do, but, or the readership, but for me, it keeps me reading, it keeps me writing, I'm developing content, it keeps me thinking. So.
Well, I think what blogs do is present thought, public thinking in public, if you will, that's in bite-sized chunks. Most of my posts are somewhere between 300 words and 1,000 words. That's about a minute to 3 minutes worth of reading. And any blogger that's any good is going to give you something valuable in that time. It's also scannable. Podcasts are very popular. I do one with Art Petty about leadership books. But you can't scan a podcast. You can't say, oh, what are the big hits? Okay, I don't need to go with that. You have to listen to it to get it. I'm still blogging. That doesn't mean I'm not doing other things too.
Right. Well, do you think people are experiencing an information overload? Like there's just so much out there. I mean, I know myself, it seems like every day I discover a podcast that I subscribe to, and I don't have time to listen to all these. So do you think there's an overload problem?
I think there's more of a mofo problem. I think there's a FOMO problem, a fear of missing out.
Yes.
I got a pretty good idea what blogs I want to listen to. I've got a regular routine for finding other ones that might be interesting, plus other stuff. I read to print sources regularly because you read print differently than you read stuff online.
Yes.
I do a lot on Facebook, but that's in a personal sense, direct with other people. It's not a publishing platform for me.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Well, I'm really fascinated. I'm currently working on a book myself. So I'm really fascinated. And this is where I may need your help in the future because I'm drafting it. But what advice, share advice about writing a book and what are the do's and don'ts? And I've probably already done too many don'ts, but go ahead.
Well, I think the major thing for most people, understand most of my clients are mid-career and very successful to begin with. So they come with a certain knowledge base and confidence, and they're willing, though they're also coachable. One of the things I screen new clients for is coachability. If you're not coachable, I don't want to talk to you because it's a waste of both our time. But if you're thinking about a book, the first thing to do is find out what's entailed in writing it. And if you go to my writingabookwithwally.com website, there's a PDF there that outlines the entire process. Most of the people that I start with figure it's a one draft process. It's not. They figure that it's something that they can do pretty easily. It's not. They figure they'll get it over with quickly. It's not. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you go into the project thinking that you're going to write for a weekend and be done, it's going to turn hard on you.
Right. That's for sure. Yeah. So really, we should go look that up because you really kind of outline on your website. What was that website again?
Writingabookwithwally.com. We're not into subtlety here.
Yeah. Writing a book with Wally. I like it. I like it a lot. Great. Well, what's your process for helping people write books? Because lots of people are interested in writing books now. And what's your process? And then I've got other questions. Yeah.
The books are unique in that every author works a little bit differently. And what I suggest to clients is they look at Mason Curry's wonderful book about daily rituals, which is about daily rituals for artists of all kinds, including writers. And when you look at that, you see that, somebody pretty much does it every way you can think of. So I have another handout that I give people. It's called the Sacred Seven. And the first one is, take what's possible, take what the world gives you. But my process starts with talking about how you go about doing a book and what's involved. And every client's a little bit different. I have a client right now that's working on a book on burnout to be published with Penguin in the fall, or it'll be published after the fall. She's due in the fall. And her process is she writes a draft, I look at the draft, she goes back and writes some more. And I work with a couple of clients that way. I work with another client where we go back and forth on every chapter. We did 22 revisions of one chapter in his last book. And that's a little bit different. I've got a guy now who isn't really going to do much of the writing, but he's got the concepts and he's got the material and he's doing the research. So probably we'll talk through something and I'll write with him. It's just different. And the other thing, Jann, are you a morning person or a night owl?
I used to joke with my college students. I used to say, well, I'm not really good in the morning and I'm not really good at night. I'm good from 10 to 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you know that,
yeah,
and you're going to write, and writing's important to you, that's when you need to be writing.
Right. And you need to protect that time, yes.
Okay. And I presume you have some relationships beyond this one that we're starting here on video. You have family and friends and loved ones and so forth. Okay. So one of the rules is those relationships are sacred. They just are. And I've got people who are working on books when this COVID thing started up. who are not working because they need to be spending time, in their case, with their children, and so forth. So you look at that, but you find what works for you. You find the process that works. Once you do, you go ahead. But don't expect there to be one process. Don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect it to be quick. And don't sacrifice either your sleep or your relationships.
Right. That's good advice. Do most of your clients find publishers?
Most of them self-publish. They prefer the control. That doesn't mean they do books that look like they're turned out by amateurs.
Right.
I mean, part of the problem with self-publishing, it's not that people are against self-publishing. It's when they pick up a book that looks like the cover was done by a 3-year-old with finger paint, they say, how good can this be?
Right.
And it turns out usually that what's inside is pretty much like the cover.
Right.
And if that's what you mean by self-publishing, don't do it. But can I reach over here and show you something? Okay, hang on one sec.
Okay.
You can probably still hear me.
So while Wally's doing that, I just want to remind people that go ahead and please put questions in the chat. If you want to know anything about writing, blogging, writing a book, please enter your questions in the chat. Okay, Wally.
Okay. Can we see the book here?
Yes. Adapt.
Okay. It's Adapt. It's by a fellow named Blaine Strickland. Blaine is a client of mine. We've done 2 books together. This book looks like any book you'd get that Penguin or Random House or McGraw-Hill would do. That's what you got to do. The cover design is unique. That's what you got to do. I mean, all the stuff is like it's supposed to be.
Yes.
Now, this very book, was a bestseller on Amazon the first day.
Wow.
How did we do that? Well, we didn't do it. Blaine did it. I didn't even have anything to do with that part of it. But
what did he do?
The book is called. There's a whole process that he went through, alerting people, getting results, doing pre-sales. It's not really the scope of this, but I think what's important is if you pick this book up, there's no way you could tell that it was done by an individual.
No.
And that's what you have to do. We used to have a saying when I was in direct marketing that the best advertising in the world can only sell something once. And the example we used to use is a beer that used to be in New York called Peel's Beer. And they had great ads. They had 2 great radio personalities as voices and little cartoon guys, and they were cute as could be. But once you had that first sip of Peel's Beer, it didn't matter how cute the ads were. You were not buying any more of it. It was just dreadful. If you got a good book, it needs to be published with the same quality.
Yes.
But you can do that. So.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, what are the main reasons people should write a book?
There are a bunch of them. Some common ones are, I want to increase my reputation so I can increase my fees, maybe get speaking engagements. There's all of that business stuff. Some people want to write a book because it's part of their bucket list. I've always wanted to write a book, and so I'm going to write a book because I want to write a book. Some people write a book as a way of explaining things. I have a client who runs a roofing company, and he wrote a book that he could hand to people when they asked him about his business so they could read about it. A little bit about the history of the business, but mostly about this is what different kinds of roofs are, and this is how you do maintenance, and here's how you can make it less expensive and more expensive. I mean, it was an explainer type thing. Some people write a kind of memoir. Here are the lessons I've learned in my life so I can share them. My favorite is the guy who wrote a book only for his children. They asked him over and over again about his experiences in the Vietnam War. where he had interesting experiences and won a medal or two and that sort of thing. And he felt that that was going to go away, and it was part of his legacy. That's one of your words, legacy.
Right, yes.
So he has a bunch of books which he wrote. He's printed up. They're prepared. His kids won't see them until after the funeral.
Oh, wow.
And then they all get a copy, so that all of the stuff that he's learned and thought about and stays in the family.
I would call that a legacy book, a legacy book of love, really. Wow.
It is a legacy book. It's the kind of thing. My wife has a great-grandfather, who was in one of the legendary Confederate regiments in the Civil War. It's important to know that. It's important to know about the grandfather who went on a tiger hunt in India in the 30s. You want to have that stuff around, yes. You know, and that's what his book is all about. His kids don't know about it, which is one reason why you're not getting his name. Plus, they don't have his permission. But that was the whole purpose of his book.
Right.
So.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, let's talk about the current time. You know, during this pandemic, how has blogging changed because of this, or writing, or what people are writing, or have you noticed any difference because of?
Well, I think everybody seems to be climbing on the I'm going to help you in this era of the coronavirus bandwagon, which is why I'm not doing it. That's one thing. Probably half the blog posts I see now are about something related to the pandemic, or related to quarantine and lockdown and things like that. And I think that's probably the big way that things have changed. And I think I just disappeared from your video. We'll see if I come back.
No, I see you.
Oh, okay. On my end, I'm coming back.
Yeah. No, I see you. There you are. Well, very good.
Okay.
So are you finding that people are wanting to write more books now, or less books, or have you noticed any difference in that in your business?
The funny part of that is that I talked to so many people who were prospective clients when the lockdown part of this all started. And by God, they were going to go home and they were going to take this time to write their book. Hasn't happened. And I think the reason is there's too many other challenges going on. You got to figure out how to do it. You don't need to add one more project. What you need to do is, keep everybody together and fed and housed and safe.
Yeah, it's a project, that's for sure. I mean, you have to really be committed. I've written a few books. I'm working on one now, but I was in higher ed, so that was kind of it wasn't really an expectation, but it was an expectation I had for myself. So what are your predictions, Wally, about the publishing field in the future? I mean, so many publishers, actually the number of publishers, they keep, to me, it kind of reminds me of Pac-Man in the old days, where, they keep buying each other up or merging or something. So there are fewer publishers, but what do you see as trends in the industry?
Well, I'm not sure there are fewer publishers. I think there are fewer of the larger legacy publishers.
Yeah, right, okay.
But I see a lot of mid-sized, small houses that remind me. My first book was published in 1972, and there were still a lot of the houses around that were the lengthened shadow of a couple of people who really loved books or loved manufacturing or something. I think if the major legacy publishers keep doing what they're doing, which is what they've always done, then they're going to be a lot like Brontosaurus.
Yes.
They have the distribution, but they're still doing 250-page books when people seem to be wanting shorter books. They're still doing a book. I mean, the reason we did 250-page books when I started out was that you might only write 5 in a career if you really wrote nonfiction.
Right.
And so you had to get lots of stuff in it. That's not true anymore. It's just not true. And what I see in how people choose books now is they look for, if they can get a book on one thing, they'll take it. If they got to take a book that has 3 or 4 things in it and they only want one, they'll go take the one out of it. But they prefer one book. And there's a lot of people feeding that particular desire.
Okay.
So
I see that.
I see more shorter books.
Okay.
I also see more what would be small to mid-sized publishers, people who do more than their own stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the legacy publishers can continue, but I think if they do, they've got to modify the product that they're putting out.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, very good. Well, I see a question here that I kind of want to follow up here. There's a question. Somebody's interested in self-publishing a photography book in the next year or so. How does this person go about finding a printing company if they want to self-publish? Lots of options are online. How do I know which one is best or reputable? I guess the main question is, how do you evaluate online, or not online, well, self-publishing? How do you evaluate those companies?
Okay. I would start by running very rapidly in the opposite direction from anyone who tells you it's easy or cheap.
Okay.
Because they're usually trying to sell you something. You know, it's what is the thing from Princess Bride? Life is paid, princess. Anyone who tells you anything else is trying to sell you something. And it's kind of like that here. Now, what you look for, whoever you are out there, is an author services company. That's the term of art. And those are people who can do the things like design the interior, arrange for printing, and so forth. There are a few of them. How do you find out who the good ones are? I would use my social media to find some people who've used the ones you're talking about. The good ones, by the way, will give you references.
Okay.
So you can say to, say, 1106 Design, which is an author services company that several of my clients have used, and I've used personally. If you go to them and say, who can we talk to that you've worked with, they'll tell you. And other reputable places will too. The thing about, oh, we can't tell you, our clients don't like it, that to me is a red flag. The other thing that I would have that person look at is look for people who have done photography books.
Okay.
Okay, because there are specialties in this. People who are good at children's books may not be good at business books. People who do business books are probably not good at fiction. Photography book is a special kind of beast. One way to find it is to go find some photography books, talk to the people who published them. You'll find a couple of self-publishers. They'll tell you who they dealt with.
Yeah, and I think that's wise. You know, get on social media. Has anyone self-published a photography book? What I discover is, you know, photography, publishing that might be quite expensive, because I had a book come out on, it's called Women of Yucatan, 30 Who Dare to Change Their World. And it was a book of black and white portraits, photographs with essays. And we found a publisher, but I thought the publisher did a very so-so job on the photographs, even though these were high quality photographs. And so, yeah, I think your advice is wise. Find a self-published photography.
Yeah. Let me say something else too. Don't underestimate Amazon as a research tool. I mean, if you want to know who's published photography books, go to Amazon, search for photography books, and look at all the people. Contact the ones that look interesting. Contact the ones who are doing a book like you want to do. And that's good advice for business as well. If you're thinking about doing a book and you want to find experts, Go see who's published books on Amazon on the subject that you're interested in, and who's, done well and stuff. Follow up with their articles.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good advice. Well, I want to shift gears here a little bit. Again, I want to encourage people to have other questions.
That was me shifting gears.
Okay. If you have other questions, please put them in the chat. Because Wally, you've got good advice. So my topic is legacy, and really leadership legacy. Just when I say the word, how do you define legacy? What's it mean to you? And you mentioned memoirs, and so I think some people are leaving a legacy through writing, but just what's the word mean to you when you hear it?
Well, it brings to mind two things. One is a term that my friend Terry Moore uses all the time. He describes legacy. He's in commercial real estate. He says legacy is everything you leave behind except the cash and the keys. So all the things that people remember. My dad said for years, you're alive as long as they tell stories about you. Legacy is the stories they tell about you.
Okay, I like that.
Okay. Legacy is my wife's grandfather on the tiger hunt in India.
Yes. Yeah, they're stories, right. Memories, stories, right.
Yeah, we do it this way because Grandpa said.
Yeah.
Remember how his hat used to look like a halo? I mean, yeah, it's how we live on.
Right, how we live on. I like that. I'm writing that down. How we live on. Love that. That's good, Wally. Okay. Can you share a story that comes to mind related to you or a legacy of someone you know? Now, again, I know you said, hunting for a tiger, in 1930, but can you think, what else comes to mind when I say?
Well, the one that comes to mind is a classic, and you've probably even shared it, but it's the Alfred Nobel and the obituary that he read that he thought was his, but was actually his brother's. Nobel was the inventor of dynamite, and his brother died before him. And the Paris paper published an obituary thinking it was Alfred, and it read, "The merchant of death is dead." And Alfred thought, gosh, I don't know that I want to be known as the merchant of death, which is why you have the Nobel Prizes today. Because he left.
Interesting. That's a classic. Wow. Yeah. Do you think legacy, how people think of it or perceive it, will be any different because of the pandemic? You think it will?
Well, I think the pandemic is going to be this generation's depression stories.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents grew up in the Depression. Their stories and values, many of the things about the way they lived were based on that experience. And I think what's happening today for a lot of people is going to have that same kind of resonance. I'm 74, so I'm not going to be here all that long. But I've got a great grandson who's probably going to be around 100 years from now. And when he looks back, he's probably going to remember the stories his parents told. And
yes. Yes. That's a very good point. I think you're absolutely right on, because my father's 95, and again, because of the Depression, it affected how he lived the rest of his life. Yeah. So I think that's wonderful. Well, great. I'm not seeing any more questions. Does anyone have any more questions for the chat? Well, I like to ask Wally, what should I have asked you that I didn't ask that you either want to share or people need to know? Now, you haven't mentioned much about leadership. Let's talk about leadership a little bit, because not only do you blog about writing and blogging, but you also blog about leadership. So let me ask you some leadership questions. How do you think leadership or leaders might change because of the pandemic?
I think a couple of things are going on.
Okay.
One is that having almost everybody virtual is going to expose a lot of bad look over your shoulder kinds of bosses because they won't be able to do it anymore.
Right.
My father-in-law said to me a couple of years ago, he was talking about, how people wanted to look over people's shoulders at work. And he said, if you got to look over somebody's shoulder to find out if they're working properly, one of you doesn't know what they're doing.
Yes.
And well, I think that's going to happen. I think the other thing that's going to happen is there are an awful lot of people who are in leadership positions who are going to realize people can do pretty well on their own. I mean, this is something that was coming, I think, but having people work out on their own and having them do okay, that's going to surprise a lot of folks. And the other piece is we are conducting this giant experiment all around the world. We have people working at home who all of a sudden have control over what they do most of the time. They can control if they work late or early. They can control if they take a 2-hour lunch or no lunch. They can decide to work on whatever they think is most important first. Now, when they go back to work, they're going to expect that.
Right.
And I don't know how a lot of companies are going to deal with it.
Right. I'm also thinking that maybe a lot of these big companies, maybe they don't need all that office space.
Well, then my friends in commercial real estate will do quite well. But here's the problem. Places like Bank of America just move people into spaces.
Right.
Okay. Or Yahoo did the same kind of thing. Now that means they either purchased or leased up that property.
Right.
So they got it.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's going to be tough walking that cat back.
Right. I think it's just going to be really interesting how that all shakes out. I know you review leadership books. What are some of your favorite books right now? Leadership books. So if
my favorite all time is Peter Drucker's Effective Executive.
Okay.
Which I don't think is necessarily great for people who are just now coming into the workforce because it's kind of old language and stuff, but the value is there.
Okay.
The Kuz's and Posner's Leadership Challenge is still the best overall book on leadership. And they're up, I think, to their 8th edition of it. And they keep revising it, so it keeps current as they go. One of the books that I've read recently that I think is really good, but not a leadership book in the classic sense, is Bob Iger's book, and I'm going blank on the title of it, but the CEO of Disney for 15 years, 20 some years, really good read with lots of lessons.
No, that's
Hang
good.
on one second. I needed to do something here because I had an alarm ringing in my ear.
Okay.
But I'm back.
All right. Great. Well, good. Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So, Wally, what else should I have asked you that you think people need to know or that you would love to share?
Give me a minute to think about that.
Okay.
Now I'm taking this from the perspective of looking back.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that comes out of reflecting is how important relationships are.
Yep.
When times get hard, they buoy you up. When you have something to celebrate, they help you celebrate. But it's really easy to have, particularly if you like what you do, and I love what I do, it's easy to let your work subsume the rest of your life.
Right.
So I suggest you make time for the rest of your life. Andy Grove said something that really caught my attention probably 30 years ago and changed the way I think about all that. He said, you need to go home because you can always find something more to do at work.
Right.
So now I have a regular quitting time.
Yeah, and I find, I was, I mentioned I'm working on a book myself, and I said to my husband the other day, I said, when I start writing, which involves a lot of reading, I just get in the flow and I totally lose time. Like my husband said, are you going to change the laundry? And I said, oh yeah. And then like 3 hours later, he said, did you change the laundry? I said, no, I totally forgot. I mean, writing to me.
Okay, stop. My rule is when you write, the door is closed. And I used to tell my kids, if you come through that door, you better have to call 911 too, or it's not important enough. My wife has lived with me for years and all my foibles, but she knows that when the door closes, I'm right, and she'll break in if it's super important, but she won't break in just to, ask if I change the laundry.
Right.
She'll either go change the laundry herself or remind me when I come out.
Right. Exactly. I mean, because writing to me, I mean, you really do have to focus. It's hard to just sit down and in 10 minutes, crank it out. You really have to work at it. And
you need an hour to 90 minutes to get into a project and come out. We've got a lot of brain science and scans and stuff that tell us that.
Yeah.
You need a break between those sessions. A break is 10 to 20 minutes or something different.
Right.
But once you're in it.
Yep, that's true. Well, Wally, our time's kind of coming to an end. I don't see any more questions. Anything else? Any last words of wisdom here for the leaders?
No. I've spilled my wisdom on the floor. I can't get it.
Well, Wally, it's nice to meet you in person because I've been following you for several years now. So,
thank you
very much for helping me out, and we'll keep you posted on the summit coming up in June. Thank you.
Sounds like fun to me.
And I always say that my emphasis is on making the rest of life the best of lives. So may the rest be the best for you, Wally.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
I'm working on it.
Well,
thank you, Jann.
Stay healthy, stay hopeful. And I interviewed Jessie Lynn Stoner, and I know you're a fan of hers. I interviewed her last Friday, and that was great too. So thank you very much, Wally.
Thank you, Jann. You have a great day and a great life.
Okay.